Patel or Patel?
Yes, it's P-A-T-E-L, Patel.
Patel, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Ms. Patel.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Patel, before we proceed any further, I will put you under oath and then just state for the record your name, your title, and the agency you represent. And then maybe after that you can introduce your legal counsel. Thank you. Ms. Patel, would you kindly raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. Would you now please state your name, the agency, your title, and the agency you represent?
My name is Reena Patel. I'm here with the Attorney General's office, and I am an Assistant Attorney General.
Thank you. Will your counsel kindly identify himself as well?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. James McAllister. I'm also an Assistant Attorney General.
And are you serving as Ms. Patel's legal counsel today?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Patel, we're going to jump right into it. We don't have much time. Would you please share with us, the members, what your role is, or what your role maybe was, relevant to the Saipan Development LLC contract in your capacity as an Assistant Attorney General?
Yes, Representative. I think it may be helpful to just even with the questioning to kind of explain when I joined the office, and that may also assist in the scope of questioning. I became part of the Attorney General's office on April 2nd, 2012. And in terms of this particular agreement, I first became aware of the project in general, possibly late June, if I recall correctly. At that time, I met with some engineers, they met with CUC, they met with DQ, and I kind of just went around with everybody at that time. Prior to that, no one had ever discussed the project with me or anything else that was involved prior to that date. Then, in about early July, I first became aware that Saipan Development LLC had drafted a power purchase agreement. I had seen it approximately half an hour to an hour before we were scheduled to meet with Mr. Kurz. However, however, other people may have seen the agreement before me. I don't recall, and I don't really know. When I first got to the meeting, Alan Fletcher, Gilbert Burnbrick, and myself had decided that we needed to review the agreement internally first, before even meeting with Mr. Kerr, so that we could be aware we could all be kind of on the same page in terms of any issues that were there. So we went to CUC, met for the morning, a couple hours, then we went to lunch, and then I met with Mr. Kurz. At that point, we started to go through each line by line of the agreement, but came to the conclusion that there were so many issues in that initial draft that it would be better and more efficient for us to review the entire agreement, make track changes, and exchange drafts. Exchange drafts via email or via actual paper. That may have occurred over the course of 1 or 2 days. I don't recall all of the details within that time period, but that was the ultimate conclusion, that we couldn't just sit in one room and do this. We needed to review the agreement and do. So maybe about a week, mid-July, mid to late July, mid-July, I was asked to look at the agreement, consolidate comments that had been made by various people, and try to incorporate those comments and concerns into the actual drafting of the agreement. For a period of about 2 weeks, we had gone through, I had made changes, I would submit them to Mr. Kerr's for Sdllc, and then also give them to Tiberius Mokanu, Gilbert Burnbrick, and Edward Buckingham. At the end of the workday, I would email everybody a draft. By the morning, I'd either have comments or I didn't, and we kind of went back and forth doing that for about 2 weeks. So kind of to sum up what my role was to collect everybody's comments, consolidate them. I may have had drafting issues here and there, and also just concerns that I would see based on my experience within just contract law, and then I would email those concerns out as well. How do you think we should address this, that kind of issues, and people would provide me feedback, and we go in and further revise the terms of the contract.
Thank you, Ms. Patel. I think I asked that question before. I should have asked a more relevant question. That is, what is your role in the Attorney General's office? What are you normally responsible for?
It's an interesting I'm responsible for a lot of things that just come up. When I first started working with the office, I was responsible for complying with OPA audits. I also, at some point, became involved with counseling the credit union. More recently, I've been charged with working with the Department of Commerce. That did not come until the end of August. Just any kind of general litigation issues I've helped in drafting motions and stuff. So there are a lot of duties that I have, not just one specific role. And in the short time that I've been here, we've also rearranged the office a bit, so it's kind of...
You jumped right into it, huh? And thank you for that, clarification and explaining to us, so now at least the members have a better understanding of what your role was in this. We do see a lot of correspondence, emails, and so forth, either being written to you or you were CC copied, and I guess that would have been one of my questions. Is you seem to play an integral part of this review, and you did clarify that most of it was really sort of to facilitate the meetings that were going on, to put it into either recommendations or to clarify what issues were raised, and so that it can be presented. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's a fair statement. I do want to be completely clear. I did provide some comments as to what I thought were problematic in the agreement as well. So most of my job was to facilitate everybody else's comments and incorporate them, but I did have a few of my own.
Thank you. And I was going to get into that you said you did have knowledge of, I guess, general contract law, understanding of that, and you provided your comment to the best of your knowledge and ability.
Correct.
Thank you. And because that is a significant part of this, our review of the contract itself, meaning there were issues regarding form and capacity, and we understand that the Attorney General's office's role is to review contracts for form and capacity. Were you responsible for reviewing the contract as to form and capacity?
Could you maybe elaborate on the question? It's kind of, when you're talking legal terms, it kind of encompasses a broad range of issues for me. So
well, whenever a contract is signed between an agency of the government or the Commonwealth government and a contractor, it is the role of the AG's office to ensure that the form, I guess the structure of the document, is done properly, and more importantly, the capacity, meaning are we signing a contract that you know better than I what constitutes capacity, that whether we are we have the ability to sign it, whether the government's or the public's interest is protected in any contract, whether the legality of the contract, legal issues, and whether we can legally sign it. I guess in this case, one of the legal issues that can be raised is whether the governor was legally authorized to sign off on behalf of the CNMI government. There are issues being raised now regarding whether the pledge and security agreements were obligated that public resources be pledged as a guarantee for this project, and if so, is this contract considered a public debt? And if so, does it require, as the Constitution states, the full faith and credit of the government, which requires the approval from the legislature? Those are legal things that are kind of legal issues that need to be identified and clarified, but among many other things. So maybe I should start with this question. We understand the Attorney General himself is a busy man. Normally, a lot of these legal issues will be passed on to his assistant Attorney Generals to look into. So, first question is, were you tasked with or assigned by the Attorney General to review this contract as to form and capacity? That's the first question. Second, if you were not, then who was?
To answer your first question, no, I was not assigned to look at form and capacity. To answer your second question, I do not know who was assigned to do such things. As I stated previously, I joined the office in April, and so I do not know who.
Thank you. Okay, I recognize Representative Guerrero.
Hi, Ms. Patel. How are you?
Good, and yourself?
You were in the office from April, right? And you didn't see this contract till about June, July, roughly. But in your work on this agreement, right? In your work on this agreement, did you ever question the governor's authority to sign the agreement?
I did not question the authority. That determination, those issues were resolved by someone else, or determined, or I guess analyzed by someone else. So that wasn't what I was tasked with, and I never asked.
Did you know who it was analyzed by?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Guerrero. Representative De La Cruz, did you raise your hands?
No, Chair, but I will ask questions.
So recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Ms. Patel.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us today. You stated earlier that you went over the contract with PPA prior to the signing. Under whose? I guess the question is, who asked you to look over the contract? Was it the Attorney General? Was it somebody else in the Attorney General's office?
I was asked to review the contract by the Attorney General, Edward Birkingham, as well as Chief of the Civil Division, Gil Burnbrick.
Okay. And after receiving that request, you made a review of the contract. Did you find anything in the contract that raises some concerns, maybe? What did you find? Was it a good contract? Did you think, oh, this is the best thing that ever happened? What did you find?
Rep, can I just ask a clarification on your question? Ms. Patel did state that she did review it in terms of the contractual law, so I guess she may have reviewed the legal provisions of the contract, and I just want to clarify, was your question what was your findings based on your review of the contract, the legal provisions of the contract? Was that the question you were trying to ask?
Yes, yes.
I did review the contract. As I had also stated, we revised the agreement sufficiently, or extensively from the original draft. I do not recall every provision that I thought there were issues with, things that could have been better. The provisions that I do recall at this time, there were some issues with force majeure, there were some issues with pre-existing hazardous materials and conditions. There were things in the default provisions that we had changed around. There were also a lot smaller things, word choices, rights to review, how those kinds of things, and it's been a couple months and there were so many so I don't remember all of them, but those were a few areas that I recall.
So those few areas that I guess you've placed your input into, do you know if they were ever taken into consideration, and did it ever make any changes to those considerations with regards to those certain provisions in the contract?
They were taken into consideration and had been discussed, at the very least, generally speaking again, between myself, Mr. Burnbrick, Mr. Buckingham, depending on the provision, and Mr. Mukunu. We had kind of gone through, are these changes valid? Should we make them? Because we put our changes into various drafts, those were also discussed at some point with a representative from Saipan Development, LLC. Some changes were accepted and some changes weren't, but again, without looking at all all of the drafts, I couldn't tell you which exact ones were taken in and which exact ones weren't. They'd be apparent in the agreements if you compare them, but I don't specifically recall.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Patel. Now, seeing that the Attorney General, I guess, was the negotiating party for the governor on this power plant agreement, do you know if there was ever a background check to this company, Saipan Development LLC? And is that normally a procedure that is undertaken by the Attorney General's office to see if these companies that want to do business with the CNMI government are well capable of entering into such agreements or negotiations? In other words, was there a background check made by this particular company, Saipan Development LLC, that you know of?
I do not know of any background checks, but again, that may be a product of when I became a part of this process. But I do not know. And as to, I think, your sub-question, whether or not it's regular within the regular procedure process within the Attorney General's, I do not know, because this was a larger contract. I personally never experienced it, and I've not been aware of any of those procedures.
Okay. I will yield for now, Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Ms. Patel. I can't expect you to recall what your comments were. Did you bring a copy of your memo or your report or your review of the contract with you today?
No, and to also maybe clarify that there wasn't just one draft, there were several, and so those comments may have changed throughout those, so it wouldn't be a matter of bringing one document, it would probably be a rather large stack.
Thank you for clarifying that. Did you summarize all those various communications or your review into one report?
There may have been maybe a couple of summaries of the overall the bigger issues, and maybe not of all of the small ones, but I think there were a few term sheets, if you would call them that.
And who did you submit your comments to?
They were submitted to Gilbert Burnbrick, Tiberius Malkanu, Edward Buckingham. A few of those comments for those sheets were also submitted to Saipan Development Company in the process of negotiation. And I don't recall if I had sent it to anybody else, but at least those people.
And were most of that through emails?
Yes.
Do you still have those emails on, those records in your file?
Yes.
Would you kindly provide this committee with a copy of those emails? We do have emails here. We are not sure. At least I am not sure if most of your comments were not substantive, as more of, like I said, either short statements. I don't recall reviewing anything that could have been considered your recommendations or your review, or recommendations based on your review. Would you be able to provide this committee with copies of it? I mean, without going through the subpoena process, this is just asking for cooperation.
I would be willing to provide any documents that you're requesting that are not subject to privilege or attorney-client work product or any of those other restrictions.
Fair enough, fair enough. Are you familiar with Mr. Tiberius Mocano's, what did he call it, point of concern? His recommendations, basically, that was written and provided to Mr. Clarification, points of significant concern. Are you familiar with that document?
I do remember the document. I might, if I looked at it, then I would be familiar with the issues that were in it. Off the top of my head, I probably couldn't remember them point for point right now, but if I looked at it, I'd be able to recall it.
But you did see it?
Yes.
Were the points of significant concern, was it a product merely of Mr. Tiberius Mocano's review, or was it did it take into consideration other people's reviews, such as yours? Were your comments incorporated into that document?
I do not know who else he may have consulted in preparing that. He was counsel to Sdllc at that time, so the issues that he had raised had been raised prior to his drafting of that document and had been discussed to some length prior to the preparation of that document. His concerns may have more detail than we had discussed before, but if I recall correctly, those issues had been discussed prior to the preparation of his significant points of concern.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, were any of his concerns that you yourself had found or identified? Members, can we take a short recess? I'd like to ask our staff to provide Ms. Patel with a copy of that correspondence. Short recess.